Imagine standing before the final words of a man who shaped the history of an entire nation. A patriarch who lived for more than a century, who walked with God, who witnessed impossible promises begin to unfold right before his eyes. That man was Jacob. Now picture the moment. In his old age, surrounded by his sons, he begins to declare the destiny of each one of them. These are not merely farewell words. They are prophetic declarations that would reveal the future of the tribes of Israel for generations to come. Some of these words are clear, others are harsh, but one of them draws special attention. When Jacob speaks about Issachar, he uses a strange image, almost unsettling. He says that Issachar would be like a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. At first glance, that comparison can sound almost like an insult, perhaps even a curse. Why would a father choose such an image to describe his own son? Was he suggesting that Issachar would live his life carrying heavy loads, destined for hardship and servitude? Or is there something far deeper hidden behind that metaphor? The curious thing is that when we go back to Issachar's story, we discover something surprising. He was not just another one of Jacob's 12 sons. His life reveals clues of a quiet wisdom, a strategic role, and a purpose that many readers of the Bible simply overlook. And perhaps that is exactly why this story is almost never told. Today, we are going back in time, back to the ancient lands of Canaan, to discover who Issachar truly was, and why Jacob's seemingly simple statement may hide one of the deepest messages in the Old Testament. Because sometimes what looks like a curse may actually be a hidden revelation. To understand who Issachar was, we need to go back many years before Jacob's prophecy to the moment when his story first began. In the ancient lands of Canaan, Jacob's household was far from peaceful. At first glance, it might have appeared to be just a large nomadic family living among tents, flocks, and open fields. But beneath that surface was a home filled with intense emotions, silent rivalries, and deep struggles for love and recognition. At the center of it all was Leah. She had become Jacob's first wife, but not by his choice. Jacob had worked for years to marry Rachel, Leah's younger sister, the woman he truly loved. But through a deception orchestrated by their father, it was Leah who ended up marrying him first. From that moment on, Leah carried a silent burden in her heart, living beside a man who did not love her the way she longed to be loved. Rachel remained Jacob's favorite, and that reality created a constant tension inside the household. Every gesture of affection, every glance, every word seemed to carry weight within that fragile family dynamic. It was in this delicate environment that Leah gave birth to her fifth son. When the child was born, something shifted inside her. This was not just another child. For Leah, this birth carried deep meaning. She chose to name the boy Issachar. In Hebrew, the name carries the idea of a reward, a wage received for effort. For Leah, this son felt like God's response to the silent suffering she had endured. It was as if, in her heart, she was saying, "God has seen my pain, and He has not forgotten me." And without realizing it, she was giving a name to someone who would one day play a quiet yet incredibly important role in the story of Israel's family. Because sometimes the greatest purposes begin in the most unlikely places, and in the stories almost no one pays attention to. Issachar grew up in an environment where peace was rare. Jacob's household was large, full of sons but also full of tension. Each mother fought for space and recognition. Each son tried to find his place, and favoritism was something everyone could feel. In that environment, Many of Issachar's brothers developed strong and impulsive personalities. Some were natural warriors. Others sought leadership or recognition. Rivalries, even when silent, were simply part of everyday life. But Issachar seemed to walk a different path. From an early age, there was something about him that stood out, a quieter, more observant nature. While his brothers ran through the fields, argued among themselves, or rushed through their daily tasks, Issachar often stepped aside, not out of loneliness, but out of curiosity. He enjoyed gazing at the horizon for long stretches of time. He paid attention to the movement of the clouds, the direction of the wind, the behavior of animals, and the subtle changes happening in the natural world around him. It was as if he was constantly trying to understand something others could not see. Some of his brothers thought it was strange. Others simply ignored it. But Leah, his mother, watched in silence. Deep in her heart, she sensed that there was something special about that boy. Issachar seemed to possess a unique sensitivity to the world around him. It was as if he was constantly learning from what he observed, connecting details that most people overlooked. And that quality would become even more evident on a night that would forever change the way his own family saw him. A simple night, beneath a sky full of stars, that would reveal something unexpected about the quiet boy named Issachar. That night seemed like any other during the family's journey. The tents were set, the flocks had settled, and the silence of evening slowly spread across the hills of Canaan. The sky was clear and deep, filled with countless stars shining like scattered points of light across the vast heavens. It was one of those moments when the family gathered to rest and listen to stories. Jacob often used these nights to speak to his sons about the promises of God. He told them about the covenant made with Abraham, about the promised land, and about the future God had prepared for their descendants. As he spoke, the sons looked up at the sky. Some simply admired the stars. Others were tired and distracted. But Issachar was completely focused. His eyes moved across the heavens with a level of concentration unusual for a child. After several minutes of silence, he raised his arm and pointed to a cluster of stars. Calmly, he began explaining something no one expected to hear from such a young boy. Issachar spoke about how certain points of light seemed to shift throughout the year. He said there were patterns in the sky and that those patterns were connected to changes happening on the earth. He explained that depending on the position of those stars, it might be possible to anticipate changes in the weather, the arrival of rain, and even the best time to plant crops or move the flocks. For a moment no one spoke. Jacob remained silent, staring at his son in surprise. This did not sound like childish curiosity. There was clarity in Issachar's words, as if he were describing something he had observed many times before. Leah, sitting nearby, felt her heart warm. It wasn't just the pride of a mother. It was the quiet sense that God had placed something unique within her son. From that night forward, something began to change. Issachar started observing the sky even more closely. And little by little, what began as simple observation would grow into something much greater, a gift that would eventually impact the entire family. Because sometimes what appears to be mere curiosity is actually the beginning of a wisdom that can save lives. As time passed, what had begun as simple observation became increasingly evident. Issachar continued paying attention to the signs of nature. He watched the sky at night, but he also noticed details many ignored during the day. The direction of the wind, the formation of clouds along the horizon, even the scent of the soil before a shift in the weather. Little by little, he began connecting all these things. What happened in the sky seemed to reflect what happened on the earth. At first, some of his brothers treated his observations as coincidence. After all, he was still just a young man. But over time, certain predictions began to prove true. When Issachar said the weather would change, often it did. When he suggested waiting before moving the flocks, he was frequently right. Without realizing it, the family began trusting his perception. But then came a moment that would put everything to the test. There was a season when the rains simply did not come. Days passed, and the sky remained dry. The pastures began losing their green, and the animals started showing signs of weakness. Concern slowly spread among the men of the camp. Without enough water, the flocks could die. And without the flocks, the family's very survival would be threatened. Some began suggesting that it was time to leave immediately in search of other lands. It was a difficult and risky decision. Moving the entire family and their animals required enormous effort and could lead them into unfamiliar territories. It was in that tense moment that Issachar noticed something. A change, almost imperceptible, in the air. The wind had shifted direction. On the distant horizon, the sky was forming a different pattern of clouds. For many people it meant nothing, but for Issachar it was a sign. And then he said something that required courage. They should wait a few more days. Now Jacob had to make a decision: trust his son's judgment, or act immediately to save what remained. That choice could change the destiny of the entire family. The entire camp waited. After Issachar's words, the atmosphere among the men was divided. Some believed waiting was far too dangerous. Every day without rain meant less pasture, less water, and greater danger for the flocks. Others, however, began remembering the times Issachar had noticed changes that no one else had seen. At the center of it all was Jacob. He knew the decision was not simple. Moving the entire family meant stepping into the unknown. But staying carried its own enormous risk. Still, Jacob chose to trust. He ordered everyone to wait a few more days. The first days passed slowly. The sky remained silent, and many began wondering if the decision had been a mistake. But then something began to change. The wind grew stronger. The air felt heavier. On the distant horizon, dark clouds slowly began to gather as if the sky itself were preparing something. Then the first thunder rolled across the hills. And soon the rain came. At first, gentle drops. Then a steady storm that soaked the dry earth and brought life back to the fields. The pastures began to recover. The flocks were saved. Relief spread throughout the camp. In that moment, no one needed to say a word. Everyone understood. Issachar was not simply an observant young man. He possessed a rare perception, the ability to interpret signs that others simply ignored. After that event, something changed within the family. The rivalry among the brothers still existed, but now something new had been added to it: respect. For the first time, many began to see Issachar not just as another son of Jacob, but as someone whose wisdom could guide the family in times of difficulty. Without seeking leadership, without raising his voice, he had proven his worth. And this would only be the beginning of the quiet role Issachar would play in the history of Israel. Years passed after those events. Jacob's family grew. New challenges emerged, and each son began walking his own path in the story that would eventually form the tribes of Israel. Then the moment came that would mark the end of Jacob's life. Old and weak, he called his sons to gather around him. It was time to speak his final words, not only as a father but as a patriarch. These were not simple farewells. They were declarations filled with meaning, revelations about the future of each tribe. When Issachar's turn came, Jacob said something curious. Issachar would be like a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. For centuries, many have interpreted that phrase negatively, as if Jacob were saying that Issachar would be destined for hard labor or submission. But when we look at the story we have just explored, perhaps the meaning is different. In ancient times, a strong donkey was not a symbol of weakness. It was a symbol of endurance, stability, and the ability to carry great responsibility. It was the animal that sustained the work, that helped transport what was essential for survival. Perhaps Jacob was revealing something deeper about Issachar's character. He would not be the loudest. He would not be the most ambitious. nor the one most remembered in battles. But he would be someone reliable, someone capable of observing before acting, someone able to support others when the weight of decisions became too heavy. And perhaps that is the true message hidden within that prophecy. Because not every calling comes with fame or recognition. Sometimes the greatest purpose is to be the one who supports, guides, and keeps everything standing, even when almost no one notices. And so the story of Issachar reminds us of something powerful. True reward is not always found in being seen by everyone, but in faithfully fulfilling the role God has entrusted to us.